Hey everybody, Eric Regina here, and welcome to the 131st episode of the Writ Podcast. Closest thing to a dynasty in Canadian politics these days is probably in Saskatchewan, where the Saskatchewan Party has governed since 2007, first under Brad Wall and now under Scott Moe. The Sask Party has dominated in election after election, relegating the New Democrats to the opposition, but polls suggest the race in Saskatchewan could be the closest in decades. Could the dynasty come to an end when the province goes to the polls in October? On this week's episode of the Writ Podcast, I'm joined by Adam Hunter, CBC's provincial affairs reporter in Regina, to look ahead to Saskatchewan's upcoming campaign. Adam, good to chat with you again.
Happy to be here.
Actually, it was just a few minutes ago we chatted. I was just doing the radio in Regina.
Yeah, we're doing a bit of a home and home here, so I appreciate you coming on and chatting and giving your expertise to us, our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm looking to hear your expertise as someone who covers the legislature there in Regina. So why don't we start with that? It's always interesting to me when you're in the summer before an election campaign, because you're in this weird, no man's land where maybe the electoral laws aren't really enforced yet. The writ hasn't dropped, but the ledge isn't coming back. How did things feel at the dissolution, not the dissolution, but the adjournment for the summer, when they all went home, screaming home to go to start their summer break?
There was a bit of screaming, and for your viewers and listeners, it was kind of a wild ending because what happened in the last couple of days of the sitting was the outgoing speaker, Randy Weeks, who is a longtime Saskatchewan Party MLA, one of the longest serving MLAs, were elected in 1999, went out, with a bang, let's say. Literally, he accused the House Leader and one of the highest profile members of the Scott Moe government, Jeremy Harrison, of bringing a firearm into the legislature. In the past, he also accused him of wanting to bring a handgun into the legislature. Pretty explosive accusations. He also alleged bullying and harassment by members of both government and staff. The NDP called for an independent investigation of this. They actually ended up convening a committee, which Weeks was a member of. Harrison was actually on this committee at one point as well. But the committee has a majority of Saskatchewan Party, and they voted down that call for an independent investigation to this. Once the dust settled a little bit, Harrison did, after initially denying that he brought a firearm into the legislature in the past, did admit to it, and he resigned his post as House Leader, but he remains in cabinet. He said it only happened at one occasion. He was going hunting. He brought his weapon his firearm into the legislature. He wasn't stopped by security, although security, we obtained a email from that time that security wasn't aware until they saw him walking up the steps. He was in hunting camo as well, and so there was a lot of questions about the safety of this, and it's calling into question Harrison his version of the events. The NDP definitely putting some of the focus on him, the spotlight on him. That's sort of settled since then. Weeks won't be running again. He was defeated in a contested nomination in December. And initially the Premier kind of chalked this up to sour grapes. And then later kind of backed off that comment once I think he, received some criticism for it.
Before you move on,
yes.
On the weeks that he lost the nomination, was that unusual at all, or were there other MLAs that also had contested nominations? Were they kind of targeting him, or was it just a coincidence?
It depends on who you ask, and if you ask Randy Weeks, I think he feels targeted. Terry Dennis was another MLA who just is a one-term MLA from Kenora Pelly, who was defeated in a contested nomination. It's pretty rare, especially for a government this long in power, to have any of their MLAs contested in nominations, and Weeks has been someone who's been around for, as I mentioned, he was since 1999. Like, he's been there a long time. There was questions whether he should even run again, based on the experience he had and the fact maybe it was time for someone else. There was also a boundary change in play, which I think he was critical of. So he was starting to, trying to appeal to other voters that he didn't represent through those, 20 plus years. But I think he felt targeted, that they were gunning for him. That's a bad pun given the context, yeah. But hard to avoid that. And I think that was something that got tons of attention. And at the time, national news was on it.
Hmm.
And I remember speaking to Power and Politics and going on News Network to talk about this because this was something that was kind of, quite the accusation, quite the story for a, high profile sitting member of the government to bring a firearm into the legislature with all the security and all the concerns of what we've seen in Parliament in the past and we've seen in the US as well. So, that's something that is going to be hard to top as far as stories for a last day of a sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, did you get a sense of was there a confidence, apprehension leaving for the summer? Did both parties seem confident, or did any of them seem a little worried?
I think the story around the Saskatchewan Party has been the turnover, and there's a massive turnover as far as the caucus and cabinet ministers, and we talked about a couple of people who lost contested nominations. They've had I don't know one if you want to call them a floor crosser, Nadine Wilson, who was kind of kicked out of caucus for misrepresenting her vaccination status a couple of years ago. She went to the Saskatchewan United Party, who's like an up and coming party that's further to the right on the spectrum of the Saskatchewan Party. And then you have quite a few very experienced, household names here in Saskatchewan. The finance minister, Donna Harpower, Dustin Duncan, who's held a lot of portfolios here, Don Morgan, who's a very high-profile cabinet minister, Don McMorris. So these folks have all decided not to run for re-election. Gord Wyant is another one who is a front bencher, who's education minister, justice minister for time. He's running to be the mayor of Saskatoon. And just recently we had Stephen Bonk, who Eric you'll be familiar with now, as he's thrown his hat in to be the next MP in the Moosomin area, and he was the MLA there for quite some time. There's been this big turnover, more than 20 members who were voted in won't be running from 2020 to 2024. There was a couple of criminal charges in there of MLAs. One who's not running was replaced. Another one who decided not to run again. Yeah, a lot of turnover, and I think that was the narrative around the Saskatchewan Party. For the NDP, if you have, 14, 15, 13 seats, depending on where you're looking in the timeline of how they've picked up in by-elections and since the last election, there's less turnover. Obviously, there's only two MLAs who aren't running again, and they have quite a different demographic when it comes to who's, representing the NDP under Carla Beck. And Carla Beck hasn't received, I think, the same sort of criticism or maybe targeted advertising or messaging that Ryan Miley did or Cam Broten did before him, Dwayne Lingenfelter, if you want to go back from the Saskatchewan Party. Maybe they're waiting to kind of figure out what her weakness is or where they think she's vulnerable. But we haven't seen that kind of pre-election targeting of, okay, this is why she's bad for you, let's say. And she's been traveling a ton, as Scott Moe has already this summer, and we're both quite busy even in the weeks leading up to the end of the sitting, getting around the province and meeting with constituents all over the place.
You mentioned advertisements. I did see that Sask Party and Scott Moe had an advertisement kind of introducing his hometown and that kind of thing. And before we started recording, you mentioned billboards that are up there. So what can you glean from the advertising strategy of what face the Sask Party wants to put forward for this campaign?
Yeah, I think the campaign is all about Scott Moe. It's going to be different than 2020, obviously, because this will be the first time that he'll be able to go out and face-to-face meet voters, because that was a pandemic campaign, and it was quite different. There was a lot of distancing. There were maybe virtual town halls, and we didn't even get an election night where he was in front of a crowd. He was in front of an empty ballroom of just a handful of supporters speaking to the province after he won. So I think this is they're selling Scott Moe to the people of Saskatchewan, and the recent billboards have gone up. They say, I believe, strong economy, bright future. Scott Moe is smiling in them. He's not yet. There was some billboards with him with the new candidates have been nominated, but for the most part, it's a Scott Moe branded campaign, and this is, in the vein of what we saw with Brad Wall. Brad Wall was the brand of the Saskatchewan Party. He was really popular. The Angus Reid surveys that go out, typically Scott Moe and Brad Wall have held on to the first or second place despite what's been going on and the criticism that both of them had received in the past. In those Angus Reid polls of the popularity of premiers, they're usually, and you'll know this, Eric, in the 50s, high 50s, low 60s. And when you see some of their competitors who are counterparts who are in below the Mendoza line, they're hitting 200. It's quite something to see that they maintain this popularity despite some of the hiccups and some of the criticisms and things that have been going on. And it's not like it's been smooth sailing either here for Scott Moe in the last 6 to 12 months, and even going back to the pandemic, there's a lot of things he had to navigate there. So I think this campaign will be a lot about selling Scott Moe. And you mentioned that ad. That's a lot of, I'm from Rosser and Shelbrick area. It's a smaller community. These are my roots. I'm, farm kid. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but this is who I am, and I'm not the big city guy. I'm here representing you, and in case you forgot, this is what I'm all about. And it's also kind of portraying a softer image, I think, of Scott Moe, whereas a lot of times in the national media, you'll see Scott Moe is not a firebrand, but he's a lot of times he's criticizing the federal government, and that's been a lot of the brand of the Saskatchewan Party here over the last number of years, and it's definitely defined Scott Moe's premiership, because I've been covering him the entire time, and it's been a lot of anti-Trudeau, fighting against federal government, fighting against liberal policies, obviously the carbon tax, taking the federal government to court over various things, and almost during sort of the peaks of the sitting, getting a letter or two a month about a grievance that the government has with something the federal government's doing, whether it be something that seems to be seemingly minor to things that are maybe a bigger issue. So I think it's sort of softening his image a little bit, and he's talking in a softer tone. He's kind of trying to connect with people, because when you compare that to Carla Beck, Carla Beck comes from a social work background. She was a school board trustee in the city of Regina. She represents Lakeview, which is the constituency right next to the legislature, and that's traditionally a NDP stronghold, that constituency. So she's a mom. Her kids are in college age, and she kind of paints herself as, I'm a city person, but I'm from a farm community outside of Regina, and I grew up on the farm, and I get all the farm issues. Because as you know, and as probably your listeners and your viewers will know, that Saskatchewan's election is a story of the divide between the rural vote and the city vote, or let's say the urban vote, and just the support that the Sask Party has is in the rural areas, based on previous elections and based on polling, is pretty strong.
Are we going to see, though, crossover appeal? Because, you have Scott Moe, as you mentioned, profiling his hometown. It seems like it might be a doubling down on the rural base and just making sure those seats stay in the fold. And if they win a couple extra ones, that's just extra. And for the NDP, is the NDP going to be trying to get rural seats? Is the Sask Party going to bother with the cities, or are they just going to kind of divvy up the province between them and just see what happens?
Yeah, if you ask the NDP, they're not giving up on rural Saskatchewan, and their travel schedule would suggest that they're not abandoning that vote there. I'm sure that when it gets closer to the campaign, they'll have to target certain places where they think they can make inroads maybe 4 years from now. Because when the NDP was in government, they won places like North Battleford and Yorkton, whereas right now those seem like long shots or longer shots.
But yeah, to put it mildly, yeah.
Yes, and I'm trying to be charitable, but they won't see it that way. And maybe if they can make take a bite in some of those areas and focus on certain issues around healthcare, education, cost of living, which are their three main tentpoles of their strategy and their communications that we've seen over the last number of months, that they can take a bite out of some of that support. And I think they're going to be expecting an assist from the Sask United, the Buffalo Party, maybe one of these right parties to take the Sask Party vote away, someone that's going to go into the voting booth and go, hey, I can't vote for the NDP, but I don't want to vote for the Sask party. I'll vote for one of these other parties. And if that brings down the percentage of Sask party support in some of those areas, the NDP can come up a little bit. Maybe they can be seen as an alternative. I think based on projects, and the Sask party is about big projects. They're about roads, they're about schools, they're about hospitals. They've spent a lot of money and put a lot of focus into hospitals and roads and bridges and things like that in areas where connect to urban Saskatchewan or just in urban Saskatchewan. So PA hospital money for Prince Albert. Moose Jaw has recently, in the last number of years, had a new hospital. Both communities are going to have new schools. Regina in suburban regions is getting new schools and has got new schools. That's been a lot of the messaging from the Saskatchewan Party, and that'll be their message on the doorstep is, what have you done for me in the cities where maybe the cost of living is a concern, or healthcare access is a concern, emergency room access is a concern, classroom size is a concern. They're going to talk about, we built a school for you, we built a hospital for you, we're building new roads, highways, things like that. So I think that's their messaging in the cities. I don't think the Sask party is necessarily going to abandon the cities because the NDP's trending and polling well. That's been the case in the past. The NDP typically does poll well in Regina and Saskatoon, and then when it comes to election day, they may just pick up the seats in the places where they're already representing people. They may just win, they may triple, as you're saying, double down in Shelbrook. They may double down in the ridings they've already won. Can they win those suburban ridings in the cities, the ones that kind of straddle Regina, Saskatoon, but also go into the bedroom communities and the rural areas around the cities where the Saskatchewan Party's had tons of success and they've had big wins. That'll be what I'll be watching for. Can they bite into that? And when it comes down to getting closer to the campaign and the campaign kicking off, what is the NDP doing in PA, Prince Albert? What are they doing in Moose Jaw? Do they think they can sweep and win those 4 seats? That would be huge for them, obviously. And I think judging by where I've seen them hold news conferences and where they've been traveling to and the things they're trying to really, Moose Jaw is a real focus. And I think they think the Saskatchewan Party is vulnerable there. There's one seat that's definitely up for grabs. There's no incumbent. Prince Albert is the same. There's one incumbent. Cabinet Minister Joe Hargrave is not running again. So they'll be targeting those 2 seats specifically as the ones that are also already held by the Saskatchewan Party.
We haven't had a lot of polls out of Saskatchewan. There's one, the Insightrix poll, more or less showing a tie between the 2 parties. But we don't really have any other numbers that would suggest that's the case. That would be a huge shift in Saskatchewan politics if that's the case. Do you get the sense the NDP believes those kinds of numbers? Are they doing their own polling? Are they acting like a party that's neck and neck with the Sask party?
I think, the NDP would likely be taking that poll to the doorstep and showing people, hey, you think we're not going to form government or we're not a threat in the cities. Well, this shows it. And not knowing a ton about that poll or, the processes there, it is a pretty big departure from what we've seen in the past, as and what we'd expect to see in a poll. As I said, Regina, Saskatoon, typically, even when it's on an issue by issue basis, when we see something from the Angus Reid Institute, Regina and Saskatoon tend to lean more to the NDP in some of those issue votes. But when it comes to, them being in a dead heat among decided voters, I mean, no one would anticipate that or think that is perhaps the reality, 3, 6, 10 months ago. As you say, we'll need to see more. I'm not going to get too carried away with that one poll. I think we need to see more and see a variety of pollsters hopefully come into Saskatchewan. That's one of the frustrating things as being the provincial affairs reporter here. It's such a small sample size, and a lot of times, as we get in Saskatchewan get tucked into Manitoba, so there'll be like a prairie poll, and Manitoba and Saskatchewan are different, obviously. And the demographics are different, and the electoral map is different, and the breakdown is different. And so the issues there are going to be vastly different in some cases. Some cases there's going to be overlap, but we don't get a great sense a lot of times of what's happening on the ground, and the parties do. And I don't know what the party's internal polling is. I wish I did, but I think a lot of times you can infer what they're hearing based on their advertising. their tweets, their Facebook posts, their Instagram posts, where they're spending money, where they're spending their time, and the issues they're focusing on. And one of the recent ones, not to get too in the weeds, was there was a bit of a spat over Twitter, or X, if you want to call it that, where Scott Moe put out, hey, we were the only government to put out a grad retention program, and we kept all the grads here, and there was a mass exodus when the NDP was in power because they didn't have one. And then that had, the NDP MLAs coming in and saying, well, actually, we introduced this in 2007 or earlier, and here's how our thing worked. And then we had Andrew Thompson, who's a more former Saskatchewan finance minister and DP, saying, here's a fact check, and here's what we did. And then Brad Wall came over the top and said, well, actually, here's our program. So that was, entertaining for, the political watchers here, as we had both the past and the present leadership of the parties weighing in on a grad retention program, which tells me that both parties think that there may be concerns about a flee in the province of grads, people leaving to go to Alberta, Ontario, BC, elsewhere. The Saskatchewan Party, one of their major campaign planks, not only this year, but just into the future, and the thing they talk about budget after budget, is growing the population of Saskatchewan. That's been a major, major focus by 2030, increasing it by a couple 100,000 people. And so to have a narrative out there, potentially, that people are leaving the province, though that's the old NDP narrative of the mid-90s, early 2000s, that the Saskatchewan Party doesn't want to stick. And the Saskatchewan, like many other provinces in the country, are very dependent on immigration, international immigration. When you look at immigration numbers in Saskatchewan, we lose a lot of people to Alberta still. We lose a lot of people to BC and Ontario still, interprovincial migration. What we're gaining and where we're making gains is international immigration. And so that continues to be something that I think is kind of playing in the background. And when you talk about rural Saskatchewan versus urban Saskatchewan, rural communities are working really hard to attract people from across Canada, but also international immigration, and to create community and to keep people in those communities so they can maintain services, so they can have hospitals and schools and that sort of thing, and stay thriving.
When you mention going back for a second, when you mentioned not knowing the internal polls, it makes me think that the NDP is closer to the Sask Party than they would like in their internal polls, and the NDP is a bit further back from the Sask Party than they would like in their internal polls. Often, if polls are going good for a party, they usually don't keep them to themselves.
Yes.
But even, when we are looking at even the worst polls for the NDP we've seen over the last few years, they're still doing quite a bit better than in 2020. So has something changed with the NDP? Are they a different kind of NDP under Carl Lebec than they were under Ryan Miley?
So my good friend and colleague at the Post Media, Murray Madrick, who writes a column, who's been around for and he's a dinosaur. Let's be honest. I hope he's watching this. I'm just kidding, Murray. He'll call himself that. He'll say that and he has said this, that one of the things that, and other I think analysts in the province have said, that Carl Lebec is moving more to the center, and that's where those undecided voters are in Saskatchewan. That's where the NDP had support in the past. That's where they were able to form government for 16 years, is that they had the center vote. They weren't seen as, quote unquote, a left party, or, leaning too far to the left. Or so Carl Lebec has kind of come under some criticism for not maybe sticking to the same sort of environmental policy as Ryan Miley. And she's been come out against the carbon tax. She's said she's had conversations with Jagmeet Singh about his support of a carbon tax, a consumer carbon tax, and that she's not in favor of that. She's distanced herself from the federal NDP. There's been criticism where the Saskatchewan Party has kind of targeted the NDP and saying, well, you're in favor of the confidence supply agreement and you're supporting Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau. And Carl Lebec's had to say, well, no, actually, we have nothing to do with the federal party. They make their own decisions. We're the provincial NDP. But I do think that when it comes to economic policy, environmental policy, Carl Lebec is trying, at least, from even her own supporters are saying this, or people that have supported the NDP in the past, they've observed more of a move more back to the center. Whether that's the case or not, it's kind of too early to say, because we haven't seen an election platform yet. So it's easy to say, oh yeah, well, we're going to do this. We're going to make life more affordable. We're going to, increase, supports in classrooms, which has been a big issue in Saskatchewan over the last year because there's been some unrest with the teacher contract. And we're going to, improve healthcare, which is, these are issues all across the country. Not to mention, living is too expensive, and Saskatchewan is still, one of the more affordable places to live in the country. And that's something that the government will point out, and the Saskatchewan Party will point out. But that's been sort of the focus of the NDP is, I think, a message of, okay, we can't be seen as being too far left-leaning because that's not where the voters in Saskatchewan are. The voters are more in the center.
Well, then maybe we can close on this, I guess. Then what would be the lessons then out of the election more broadly? Is it going to be a very localized campaign about local issues between Scott Moe and Carla Beck? Is it a proxy campaign of some kind between the Conservatives and the Liberals, the New Democrats? When we do see the results, assuming they're not some shocking result, can we kind of dismiss it in terms of its impact on the federal scene? Or is it going to be in some way a proxy battle for the federal campaign that's going to take place presumably next year?
Yeah, the Saskatchewan Party is, because very close ties to the Conservative Party of Canada. I mean, for a long time they would say, oh no, we're a Big Ten party, or our members are, we don't carry Conservative Party memberships. Tons of their MLAs do, and they had Pierre Poilievre speak at their convention. He was a keynote speaker, so that's very obvious. Obviously, they share a lot of the same supporters. They share a lot of the same volunteers, ground game, donors. That's a huge advantage they have over the NDP, and their donation numbers are, certainly dwarf in a province like Saskatchewan. The NDP still to this point. The NDP used to, back before my time when I had hair, still had a reputable and feared ground game. They had tons of volunteers, and my experience in covering the campaigns over the last number of years is that that's not the case anymore. That those people have aged out, or they moved out of the province, or they moved to, some of their folks have moved to Alberta, BC, and Manitoba, where there is, kind of a stronger NDP presence, or more MLAs, more money, more jobs, let's say. So the NDP is building that back up. I think they're trying to build that back up. But the ties between the Saskatchewan Party, the polling that Pierre Poilievre has, that definitely helps the Saskatchewan Party government. The support they have in rural Saskatchewan is not going away. And for people that don't know, the map doesn't help the NDP. So the NDP is not like a Manitoba situation where there's a huge population in Winnipeg and you can kind of crush in Winnipeg and do really well and maybe form government. Here, you could win Saskatchewan and Regina, the two major centers, pick up PA and Moose Jaw, and not necessarily form government, right? And they'd have to sweep. So, and that I don't, that's a mathematical possibility, but based on past results, polling, all that stuff, it's going to be difficult for them. The question I kind of have is where are they going to be focused? Are they going to be in Moose Jaw and Prince Albert? Are they going to be in Saskatchewan and Regina? Will Scott Moe be there? Is Scott Moe going to kind of double down, as you said, in the Shelbrick ads and be in the rural Saskatchewan to kind of keep that support, keep the United Party or the Buffalo Party or some of these fringe parties at bay, and kind of hold on to that support there? And it would be really fun, selfishly, and interesting to cover a legislature that was not so lopsided, to see how the Saskatchewan Party, governed and handled that, and whether they had people that wanted to stick around and they had to worry about having people in the house for votes. That's something we haven't experienced here in Saskatchewan in quite some time, but it's going to be it's a big hill for the NDP to climb, obviously, but I'm fascinated to see the campaign strategy. And I always wonder, and one of the reasons why I love covering politics is the strategy behind it. Where are you focusing your time? Where are you focusing your resources? Where am I going to be following Scott Moe to and from on the campaign trail for the first time? Because we couldn't really do it in the same way that we traditionally have done. And what impact the exodus of some of these MLAs and cabinet ministers is going to be felt in a place like Weyburn. The Weyburn people just going to vote for the Sask party because that's who they voted for typically, or are they wanting to make a statement? Yorkton, places like that. I'm skeptical, but we'll see. And in Regina, Saskatoon, it's going to be a different story. I think we're going to see a ton of NDP. They obviously have more resources in the cities. They have all their MLAs in the cities except for one. So that's where they're strongest. That's where they have, the most support, the most volunteers. So yeah, I'm anticipating seeing Prince Albert this fall. I'm anticipating seeing Moose Jaw this fall. But I think that'll be spending a lot of time in Regina and in the bedroom communities around Regina to see, whether the Sask Party feels threatened there or whether the NDP thinks they can pick up some seats. And as I said, the campaign, it feels like it's sort of soft launched already, but I know we're not into it quite yet, and there's still some time in summer left.
Yeah, well, it's still a couple months until the actual voting. I think we're still about maybe 9-10 weeks until Election Day. But as you said, the campaigning has already started. And I mean, we've been talking, I talked to you earlier this year, I think back in January, we first chatted about this upcoming campaign. So I'll be curious to see if it ends up being one of the closer ones in Saskatchewan that we've seen, as you said, as when both of us had hair. So that just tells you how long it's been. So Adam, thanks so much, and looking forward to when we can chat again.
Anytime, Eric. Appreciate it.